As the Nigerian government sets about implementing the new Petroleum Industry Act, workers in the oil and gas sector must be wondering how the legislation is going to impact their jobs and livelihoods. The Act provides for the corporatization of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company into a limited liability company with streamlined operations and a commercial focus. It also provides for the establishment of the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission and the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority. Though the government has assured that there will be no layoffs, staff of NNPC, Department of Petroleum Resources, the Petroleum Trust Fund, and the PPPRA must be wondering what lies in wait for them by way of redeployment and job security. Joining us now to discuss the impact of the PIA on the workforce in the petroleum industry and the role of labor unions in the emerging structure is Festus Osifo, President of the Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Pengassan. Festus Osifo, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, quickly, what is the concern of the labor group within the oil and gas sector about the Petroleum Industry Act that is now in force?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruben, and thank you to the team for having me. Good morning, Nigerians. For us in Pengassan and in the labor movement, we received the signing of this act with excitement. We were quite excited and elated that a journey that began over close to 2 decades ago is finally coming to rest. So for us, we were quite excited. The bill completely met the aspirations of the oil and gas workers in Nigeria. The answer clearly is a no. But is it a departure from the past? The answer is a yes. So the fact that the law has been signed today, there are a lot of positives that are in it, and we hope to draw from the positives that are stated in the bill. The bill is actually a 5 chapters document. The first one talks clearly about the governance and institution. The second chapter talks about the administration. Then the third chapter talks about the host communities. Then the fourth chapter talks about the fiscals. Then the last one talks about the miscellaneous. So within this bill, there are some novel provisions in the bill. For example, the migration of NNPC from a statutory corporation now to a company that is created under the Company and Allied Matters Act, CAMA. And for us, we see this as a good one because it will bring some level of transparency and some level of accountability to the functions of NNPC. Although our advocacy was that we should move it to a public liability company that will be quoted in the stock exchange, but where we are today is much better than where we are actually coming from. Then in the bill as well, it provided for the mid and downstream infrastructure fund. Today, our midstream completely is relatively non-existent. So, but with the provision of a bill, there will be some fund that will be set aside to develop that midstream. So for us, we see this as a good development as well. Then also, there's a provision in the bill that talks about how gas flaring will be eliminated. That the oil and gas companies, they should come and submit a plan that is tied towards the elimination of gas flaring. So we also see this as although it's a reactive step, because today we have a lot of issues that are generating from gas flaring, but it's never late. It's a bit late, but I think it's relatively still okay. Then we also have in the bill the penalties for gas flaring. We also have in the bill that once the penalty is placed on gas flaring, the funds that is accruable from it should be spent in the host community. So we see this as a good provision, because the host community is actually the people that bear the brunt of this gas flaring. So when a gas is flared in a particular community, the money that is made from it will be spent in that community. So that's relatively novel provision. Another very good one is the provision of the IJV, Incorporated Joint Venture. Although this is not mandatory, most of the IOCs today have a joint operating agreement with the government, with their partners. But what the bill seeks to do is to now give them leeway if they want to now incorporate it as a company of its own. I believe that when that is judiciously implemented, it is going to help. It is going to help in eliminating issues around cash call. So these are some of the novel provisions that are in the bill, outside the provision of the commissioning and abandonment fund, as well as the institution of environmental remediation funds. So there are some novel provisions in the bill. As well, there are also some downsides in the bill. Part of the downside in the bill for us is the provision of a single regulator in the industry. We think this is a downside in an era where we are talking about reducing the cost of governance, in an era where we are talking about the ease of doing business. It would have been better if we have a one-stop shop for our oil and gas industry. Just as we have a one-stop shop in our financial sector, you have the CBN that regulates the entire sector. Just as we have a one-stop shop in our pension industry, you have PENCOM regulating the pension industry. The same thing with NCC, the telecommunication. The same thing with bond and all that. So we actually believed that a single regulator would have been the best for the industry, because the way it is today, it has introduced what we call MUDA. MUDA is actually wastages. So if you look at the commission today, the commission actually had a board of directors. If you also look at the authorities, you also have a board of directors. So these are duplication of functions and creation of two different agencies, when one agency with two strong departments, one for upstream and another one for downstream, could have done the job. The another downside again is that the bill did not take cognizance of the energy transition. We have said this over time. During the public hearing, we advocated in the National Assembly, and we tried to lobby as well, that there must be a deliberate attempt for us to start developing our renewables. There must be deliberate attempt for us to be looking at our future, because a lot of companies today, they are transiting from being an oil and gas company to energy company. For example, Total E&P recently announced that they've changed their name from Total E&P to Total Energies. Seplat announced as well that they are changing their name from Seplat Petroleum to Seplat Energy. So a lot of other companies that are currently exploration and production company, they are transiting. So Nigerian government should have been prepared. So that was our advocacy, that some percentages should have been set aside to start developing our renewables, so that the energy transition will not catch up with us, because from the research currently ongoing, it will be a bit difficult for us to predict the future of oil in the next 30 years. So the time to act and the time to start preparation is now.
We need to take a short break, and when we return, the conversation with you will continue. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Our guest is still Festus Osifo, President of the Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, PENGASAN. Thank you for staying with us, Festus Osifo. Sundu?
Well, yes, Mr. Osifo, that was quite an exhaustive introduction there, but what is your take on one of the most contentious aspects of this act, the host communities allocation?
Okay. For us, in PENGASAN, the host community allocation of 3% could have been better. We're expecting actually that at a minimum, it should be about 5%. But the question we've always asked is 5% of what? Because, in the PIB that was submitted by the Yar'Adua government in 2008, they actually specified 10%. And that 10% was actually 10% of profit. So a 10% of profit means that any year that the companies did not make profit, like last year, most of the companies operating in this sector actually reported losses. So it means that if there are losses, then you will get 10% of nothing. So for us, we think that this 3%, as it is today, now is already a law. It could have been better, up to 5%. But the fact that we have 3% of the revenue, of the operating expenditure of the preceding fiscal year, so relatively, it's good. If it was 3% of profit, we would have said, no, this is too bad. If it was 3% of capital expenditure, it could have been bad as well, because that means that any year that the company did not spend money on capital expenditure, then the host community wouldn't have anything. But operating expenditure is there, because the company must operate. The company must pay salaries. The company must expend some sizable amount of their funds on operating expenditure. So again, when we say 3%, we look at the baseline, or the unit of expression. So it's actually 3% of the operating expenditure of the preceding fiscal year. If you look at if you take like the last 3 years as a snapshot, you discover that it's about the operating expenditure. It's about $15 to $16 billion of both the IOCs and the indigenous producing companies. So if you take this aggregately, it's going to, the 3% of it will be about $500 million. So we think the fact that the law is signed today, let's start from here. Let's ensure that the other provisions in the host communities is actually implemented. Provisions like, one, the IOCs or the settlors. The settlors in this case are the companies, but in the act, the word settler was used. So the settler must ensure that they work with the host communities to select board of trustees, men and women of integrity. It should be selected and sent to the commission, so that at the end of the day, the commission or the authority will approve. And that's number one. Then number two, they should also ensure that the funds are used judiciously. The projects that are to be selected will also be approved by either the commission or the authority. At the end, so our advocacy is that even this amount of money that is to be set aside should be used judiciously, for us not to have issues that we are currently having with NDDC, for us not to have issues that we are currently having with the Niger Delta Ministry. So I like the provision that these funds will not be administered by the government, but it's going to be strictly between the host communities and the settlers, which is the operating companies, and the regulatory body, either the commission or the authority. So that will eliminate the government interference in processes like this. So the fact that 3% is signed, we could have wished for a better, up to 5%, but the fact that we have 3% today, I think that this should be accepted in good faith. Then the host communities can rally around and call for an amendment and push and lobby for an amendment for it to be moved to 5%. But most importantly, how do we administer this fund? How do we apply this fund so that the impact will be felt at the grassroots and in those host communities? I think that's the key today.
And to my mind, it looks as though that we have failed woefully at administering this fund over the years. The days of UMPADEC, we had something like this too for the host communities through UMPADEC. Then UMPADEC snowballed into what we have as the NDDC today. Then we know all the challenges we're having. The Minister of Nigeria Delta came out recently to say that the IOCs have not paid up about $4 billion they owe them. We all know the fainting spell and the fainting saga of the NDDC. We all know how we've not seen a forensic report. Would you guys, because you are a pressure group, would you hold the feet of those people to fire with strikes and the likes if they don't do what is right? Because a lot of people are saying that this commission will be another case of NDDC. So will Pengasyn hold their feet to fire if they don't do what is right? And secondly, I'd also like to ask you, gas is something that a lot of people are looking at. There's a gas flaring provision there. We flare a lot of gas. We've not tapped gas. We keep saying gas is the future. what is your take about the provisions there for gas, and how can we optimize gas rather than looking at hydrocarbons?
Okay. Thank you so much for the question. First, NDDC is a creation of the law of the National Assembly. And NDDC as well, you have a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of bureaucracies built into NDDC. So the administration of this fund, that was why I said earlier that it is relatively different from the way NDDC is structured. Today, a lot of the IOCs and the indigenous producing companies, they actually have what they call corporate social responsibility, CSRO, where they provide schools, where they provide lights, where they provide social amenities to the community. So they have what they call MOUs between the communities as well as the companies that exist today. But what this bill tried to now introduce is to structure that process in such a and to formalize it so that it will not just be a local arrangement between the settlers, which is the companies, and the host communities. The commission will now be there to supervise and ensure that what they are doing is okay. So this fund, at the end of the day, is not going to be released to any government institutions. Like NDDC, the money is collected from the producing companies and sent to NDDC. But in this case, the money will be placed in an account that will be managed by independent trustees. So these independent trustees, they are not government appointees. They are people that will be appointed from the communities, more or less. And it will be agreed between the host communities and the companies. So that will eliminate the inefficiencies that we currently have today in NDDC. I would have been a bit scared if, at the end of the day, if we are taking this money and we are giving out this money to a government institution, then there would have been some level of fears that this money may not be used judiciously. But with the way it is today, that is going to be just between the host communities and the companies, but you have the commission supervising. So the commission is not going to collect the money, no. But theirs will be, which project are you going to do this year? I'm going to do project ABC. So they advise. So the money is not going to any government institution. So I think that's a fundamental provision, and I think that will be a little departure from what we had with the UNPADEC and with what we have with the NDDC today. Then, going back to the question you asked on gas. Yes, gas is actually the future of energy in Nigeria, and it will be the future of energy in the world for several years to come, because it's much more cleaner than the fossil fuel, because they are both fossil fuel actually, than the crude oil that we have today. Yeah, both gas and crude oil, they are actually hydrocarbon. So now, today, the bill provided almost 50 sections in the bill was dedicated to gas. Unlike before, when we have the Petroleum Act of 1969, that Petroleum Act of 1969 did not really give cognizance to gas. If you look at our archaic laws, they did not give extensive deliberations to gas. But if you now look at the current PIB, we have 50 sections that are purely dedicated to gas. Gas administration is spelled out in the bill in Chapter 2 and in Part 4 of that particular bill. So you have how will gas be distributed, how will gas be stored, how will gas be transported. They are all domiciled in the bill. So that clearly shows that gas will be the in thing. Gas is the future of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. So we are relatively happy that with the provisions in the bill relating to gas, it is going to open up that industry. Because what we have today, more or less in gas, is policies, regulations. There is no concrete law that backs gas development. And one other thing, gas is more or less in the midstream. So that is the advantage today, that we have the midstream section that will be developed so that at the end of the day, that value chain is going to improve tremendously, and it will contribute much more to our GDP. So I grossly believe that if we develop that that gas today is going to create a lot of jobs, because today we are talking about LNG, today we are talking about the CNG and all that. And even CNG is even cheaper for us to use CNGs in our cars compared to PMS. So if that value chain is developed, it's going to increase our GDP as well as creating thousands of jobs. So for us, I think that there are some provisions in the bill under the section that talks about gas that is quite novel and that is quite commendable.
Well, Festus Osifo, we can only thank you very much for joining us. Although there are many other issues, we would have loved you to comment on the response of the governors to the PIA, and also perhaps whether what has been proposed poses a threat to your members. But thank you very much indeed for joining us.